Please be seated. 1 Samuel chapter 9. For Samuel chapter 9, we're going to go through verses 1 probably to 17. We'll see how it goes. In the year of 1556, in the country of Scotland, this was a very, very dangerous place for anyone who dared to preach or to listen to the biblical gospel of grace. The Reformation was already full underway, but it was happening in Europe. We already had Martin Luther in Germany, and you had John Calvin in Geneva. But in Scotland, there was the seeds of the Reformation, that fire that was going to come, was still kind of underground, and it was being threatened continually by death threats and prison, all these things. And in the center of all of that in this year was a man, you may have heard this name, John Knox. Now, John Knox was a former Catholic priest turned biblical preacher. And once he was converted to true Christianity, he had the audacity, John Knox did, to preach that salvation was by grace alone, through faith alone in Jesus Christ. In other words, not through the authority of Rome. That conviction made him one of the most hunted men in all of Scotland. And one evening, John Knox, as he was preparing to preach in a village near the town of St. Andrews up in the north, he was headed out to this village and he was going to preach there, and people had been traveling for miles around coming to hear because they wanted to hear the gospel preached. And at great expense to themselves, in danger of their own lives. But as he was preparing to leave, a messenger came to the place where he was at with urgent news that there were troops that were in the area from the Catholic Church under that authority that were sweeping through all those towns and villages, and they were arresting anybody who had anything related or any ties to the Reformation cause. And the route that Knox was going to go onto to hit St. Andrews was going to go right smack in the middle of all those troops. But if you know anything about Knox, this man was absolutely fearless. And everyone around him begged him to reconsider. They actually begged him, maybe if you don't even reconsider, just delay, preach later. Don't do it right then. But he refused. He was quoted during this time as saying, "My life is in the hand of the Lord." So Knox set out to preach as scheduled. But he came to the edge of this village, right outside of St. Andrews there, and for inexplicable reasons to himself, he stopped, and without any explanation to anybody with him, he changed routes, and he decided to go a longer road around and went to an entirely different location to stay the night. And he later learned that evening, soldiers raided the very house that he was scheduled to stay in, and every person inside was either jailed or killed that night. Which is, by the way, if you read his story in his biography, not uncommon. That he has these near misses with the authorities. Years later, Knox would come back, thinking back on this night, and he would write this: "The sovereignty of my master so directed my steps that I escaped the snares of death, not by foresight nor by prudence, but by his unseen hand." Knox never called it luck. He never, ever called it instinct. He called it sovereignty. That's that invisible government of God who controls every single road we ever walk on, even the ones that are dark to us, we don't understand, but all of them are ordained by the one who's writing the story. Now today, the reason I bring up Knox, today we're going to be in Samuel. And we're coming to Samuel chapter 9. Just in the context of what we've been working through. And we're going to be introduced to a guy named Saul. Now, I want you to remember two things, though, as we think about Saul and about Samuel in general, and that is this: the Bible was written as a story. And I'm sure this is like broken record and you're tired of hearing this, but If you miss that it's a story, I'm a big fan of chapters and verses, but what chapter and verse has done, those are much later additions. What chapter and verse has done for us is they have self-contained these little pericopes, these little stories, and make them stand on their own. And it's never meant to be that way. We're going to be introduced to a new character. We call him Saul. But I want you to think about this in terms of the entire story that we've been reading. Now, there's actually, if you think about it, let me just reduce it down to the most maybe simplest terms. We have two stories really in mind. There's the story of 1 Samuel in general. We've been walking through a story that's unfolding. But 1 Samuel is a story inside of a much larger story in the entire Bible itself, God's entire story. So really, in one sense, we're keeping two stories in view as we walk through these individual narratives. And if you think for a moment, some people are like, listen, that sounds way too complicated, and I'll just read the text. But the problem is, you do this all the time in your everyday life, right? I shoot film for a living. You guys know this. Every single film you've ever seen, every single TV show, it doesn't matter. All of those are a bunch of sub-narratives in a larger narrative. My family just got done watching It's a Wonderful Life, one of my favorite TV shows, one of my favorite movies. And It's a Wonderful Life is about a guy, George Bailey, and we're watching the trajectory of his entire life. But everything you learn about him are all these sub-narratives. That's all you're learning. His family, his other people, the people he grew up with, right? His brothers, all these things. We do this all the time. We manage narratives and we keep them in categories. And we have to do that because if we don't do that, we will miss what is happening and what God is unfolding in the story, okay? How do stories function in general? We know this. Let's just be reminded. We have characters. We have a new one today. We have context that's always been happening. What's come before us? That's really, really critical. We have flashbacks in stories where they go, hey, remember when this thing happened, right? We have progressive revelation. A good storyteller, which God is the king's storyteller, they don't give all the details right up front. Think how horrible a story would be if that's what you did. You give these details, and it builds on itself, and it adds intrigue, and then it finally has this massive climax moment. This is how story works. This is what we're up against in 1 Samuel chapter 9. My fear is that if we don't think like that, we'll read Saul and be like, okay, yeah, this is Saul. Okay, next thing. And act like that's going to stand by itself, and it doesn't. So I just want to show us a couple of those things. I just wanted to key us into that first, and then let's jump into the actual text itself. So if we have two stories that we're dealing with, and we're going to go into Samuel 9, what has come before? Where are we at in the story of Samuel? Well, we know, just a couple of details, we know that the people were demanding a king. And if you get your text with you, if you're looking in verse 20 of chapter 8, we know that the king, you can read it here, it says, no, but there shall be a king over us, verse 20, that we may also be like the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Now, we talked about this last time. The issue wasn't that they wanted a king. They were always supposed to have a king, right? We talked about that. Deuteronomy 17, Moses wrote this before they ever entered the land. When the people ask for a king, this is the kind of king you give them. Give them a Deuteronomy 17 king. The issue came in Samuel 8:20, where it says that they wanted a king like the nations. That's 17, Deuteronomy 17. But they wanted a king that may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And the irony is dripping there if we're into the story. What's the story? We just got done reading how the ark was taken and it went to the Philistine territories. And what did God do? He went to war against their enemies. He started decimating every single Philistine city that they went into. God has been their judge and has been fighting their battles. What are they really saying in 8:20? We want those things. We want that figurehead. We just don't want Yahweh. We want to reject, we want a king. We just don't want Yahweh as our king. It's a critical spiritual depravity moment for Israel. And then we're coming to now chapter 9. So let's read. I want to read a couple verses to us. And I want to show us a couple things. I'm going to put it up. I'm not going to put all the verses up on the screen, but I want to show you these verses here. Let's read 1 and 2. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Aviel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjaminite, a man of wealth, and he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Okay, let's stop right there for a second. We have a story that's unfolding, and how does this portion begin? If you think about it, kind of like a fairy tale. There's this kind of like once upon a time kind of motif here that's happening, right? Why does he go this way? Why does he start it this way? Why can't he just say, we have Saul, and here's how it kind of unfolded? No, but he starts with this kind of lineage here. He gives us this little bit of a genealogy here, but why? Now, if you're in the story, I want to again key us in here. This is done on purpose. By the way, a great hermeneutical principle, a good Bible study method that you should always do no matter what text you're ever in, okay? Rule of thumb, whenever you're going to get into any text, do this. Start just by observing the text. That's like step one. Just look at the actual text. I fell into this trap so much when I was younger, in that you have an idea of a text, right? You have an idea, and so you're like, you kind of have these like maybe caricatures of a text. And then you start to think that caricature is actually real. It's like the fullness of the text, and then you start to base your thinking on that caricature of the text, instead of just actually observing what the text actually says first. Read the text for what it actually says. That's number one. Number two would be start asking questions about the text. Why did he start with a genealogy? He didn't with everybody else. So why did he do it with this guy? Even if you don't know all of the questions that could be asked of a text, or you don't know the answer to the question in your text, you're doing a good habit, which is just starting to ask questions of the text. We're engaging with the text. And so I was doing that this week. I do this now all the time. Why did he start with a genealogy? Why didn't he do that for everybody else? He did it for Saul, though. How come? Well, I think that there's a real significant reason if you keep to the storyline. So I just want to point out a couple of things. If we were to pick a king, this is kind of the kind of king we would probably expect to see. You want a good pedigree? You want a guy of some means? Right? He's wealthy. You want a guy that's kind of imposing, somebody that you could look up to. Doesn't hurt that he's handsome either. Right? I remember this from when I was a little, or I don't know how old I was. Maybe it was high school when former President Bill Clinton was in office. I think it was high school. And I remember being struck sometimes. I remember hearing this thing where they did this like little workshop thing where they were trying to figure out, what demographics would he hit as a potential presidential candidate? And they said that he did well with the demographic of women because women thought he was handsome and that he was stately looking, and that he was somebody that you would like, I could see him as my president. Regardless of all the other stuff that he thought. I mean, it's just this one little slot. It was this idea of like, this is how we would pick people. We look at the outward side, right? This is exactly what they're doing. Wow, look at this. We have a guy who's tall. We have a guy who is handsome. He's rich. He has a good, strong pedigree. But they start with the genealogy, which got me questioning. Why did they do that? Here's the problem. We would pick a guy like this, right? He's like the Brad Pitt of his day. I don't even know if that's a good reference anymore. Is Brad Pitt still good looking? I have no idea. But he's like the man, because it's not just that he's good looking, it's that he was better looking than anybody else, which is an interesting way of saying it. But the genealogy was freaking me out. And when you think about the genealogy, don't just think pedigree. If you don't read the genealogy within a story, all it seems like is just details. Here's his history. We're just establishing him. And the answer to that is that's not enough. Yes, genealogies are there to establish bloodlines. That's critical in ancient Israel and their tribal system. But there's more to that than just establishing who they are. There are always theological implications with every genealogy. Let me give you a famous one. Can we talk about a famous example? Genesis 5, right? What we used to laughingly call the flyover country of the Bible, right? You always would get to this part in the Bible, and it's like, this guy begat this guy, and this guy, and he was this many years, and then he died, and then he died, and then he died, and he died. And you're like, why do we care about this? I don't even want to spend my time trying to pronounce some of those names. Why was it there? What are the theological implications of this? Well, significant ones. The key rhyming motif, this continual thing that's being laid out in Genesis chapter 5 is that image bearers are dying. It is a theological confirmation of Genesis chapter 3. God is a God. When he gave the curse, it's actually it's being lived out right now amongst image bearers. God will not just slightly look at sin. He will punish sin, and he is a God of justice. And Genesis chapter 5 starts unpacking that now. Think about the privileged position that you live in, right, as image bearers of God. God has created many things that are alive and doing their functions, but we are image bearers of God. We were made to live with him. And now, post-Genesis 3, image bearers are dying. And look at, he died. The whole chapter. Genealogy, it establishes, descendants, sure. But it also has theological implications. And so, if that's true, then the question becomes, well, then what are these theological implications of the ones that we are talking about? Is there any? Well, there's a couple things that stuck out to me right away that I was looking in. And if we remember the story, because remember, what's the book that's also connected to 1 Samuel? Judges. These are books that are right on top of each other. What's the first thing that we see? Benjamin. What happens in Benjamin? If you remember, by the way, Genesis chapter 49, he's blessing his sons. Who is supposed to reign? Who are the kings supposed to come through? Judah. Now we have Benjamin. And if you recall in Judges, is 18 through 20, you have a Levite man. Let me just tell you the quick story. This is the most recent history, because what's wrong with Benjamin? Nothing, right? Isn't that in the story of Joseph, isn't that Jacob's favorite son? Yeah. But what happens in the recent history of Israel? A Levite goes to a town with a concubine. The town's name is Gibeah. And he goes and he takes in there, and he goes under the protection of this man, goes into his house, and the men of that town, this Benjaminite town, come to this house, and they demand that they have the Levi so that they can sexually exploit him. The man refuses. They're going to fight. And then what happens? The concubine instead is handed over. And she is ruthlessly abused until all evening until the morning, to where she is killed in the context of that abuse. By the way, it is a direct depiction of the town of Sodom, Genesis 19. So you have this kind of reality happening now, not in a pagan land, but in Israel, this is happening. And so what does the guy do? What does this Levite do? He is so enraged that this is happening in Israel that he dismembers. You should read the story. It's wild. He dismembers this concubine and sends her pieces of her body to all the different tribes to elicit outrage. This is happening in Israel. And what happens? They come in, all the 11 tribes, they come in and they are ready to go to war. And they go to Benjamin and they say, we want those men responsible who did this. And they refuse to hand them over. And so what's going to happen? We're fighting now. Now it's civil war. And Benjamin, inside of all of that, is completely obliterated. Just about 600 men. Tens of thousands of men are slaughtered. 600 men are left over. The text says that they hid in the cave. And then what happens after this? Just this one verse. And the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men, and beasts, and all that they found. This is the recent history of Benjamin. And the book Judges ends with saying what? In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is the state of Benjamin. So if we were here and we're like, hey, there's a man of Benjamin, and you and I are ancient Israelites, this doesn't fall flat on us. Something's different about this. That's the first thing. Go to the second thing. Now this one takes a little bit more work. It's not as easily visible in English. We talked about this, but it's been several times now. The fact that this is another question that we're asking. Why talk about his height? The Bible is not just doing word filler here, so why talk about his height? They specifically describe him as being taller. Anybody know? Bible trivia? It's okay if you don't. Here's what I want you to think. Story. Physical attributes here are being described, but you have to think story, because I'm telling you this, Benjamin's one strike. He's now being described as tall. This is ominous for Israel. This is boding badly for Israel now. Why? If we go back to Samuel chapter 2, this is when we have to be reminded of what we talked about, but it's been a little while. This verse is critical. This verse is critical here. It says, "Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed." This is Hannah's prayer, if you remember. But if you look at this in Hebrew, this word here is actually the word, oh, no, not like that, sorry. You don't have to remember this. But it is the word for tall, or you could say height. Or you could even say, semantic range, you could say lofty. And what's interesting about the Hebrew, it actually repeats it 2 times. You can see how the translators would say, talk no more so very proudly, like high, high. Don't talk high, high, right? But the literal translation would be, don't multiply your speech high, high. Why do we care about that? Because everything in this book, the thesis of the book, is going to be this. 2:4, the very next verse, is the entire thesis of the whole book. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Everything in this book that has ever been perceived as strong is brought low. Do you think it's by accident that Saul is described as being tall? Whatever is high, high, high is brought low. You think it's by accident that Goliath is described as high? The bows of the mighty are broken. The feeble are bound on strength. It's going to be the Hannahs. It's going to be the barren women. It's going to be the little shepherd boys. Those are the ones that are going to be elevated in this book, not those who are perceived as tall, as a head taller. If you miss the story, you miss these details. And then we get wrong conclusions about who Saul is and what's being unfolded. Really, it's essential. The story really does matter. That's the first 2 verses. Let's continue. 3. Now the donkeys of Kish, I just want to go to 10, by the way. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. So Kish said to Saul, his son, "Take one of the young men with you and arise and go look for the donkeys." And he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and passed through the land of Shalishah, and they did not find them. And they passed through the land of Sha'alim, but they were not there. Then they passed through the land of Benjamin, but they did not find them. When they came to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant who was with him, "Come, let's go back, lest my father cease to care about these donkeys and become anxious about us." But he said to him, "Behold, there's a man of God in this city, and he is a man who is held in honor. All that he says comes true. So now let us go there. Perhaps he can tell us the way that we should go." Then Saul said to his servant, "But if we go, what can we bring the man? For the bread in our sacks is gone, and there's no present to bring the man of God. What do we have?" The servant answered Saul again, "Here I have with me a quarter shekel of silver, and I'll give it to the man of God to tell us our way." Now, and it gives a quick editor's note here. Formerly in Israel, when a man went up to inquire of God, he said, "Come, let us go to the seer." For today's prophet, quote, was formerly called a seer. Verse 10. And Saul said to his servant, "Well said, come, let us go." So they went to the city where the man of God was. Okay. So you give a genealogy that's boding well. If this were a movie, the ominous music is playing, like, oh no, something bad's coming. And then they go into a donkey story. Now, have you ever thought about what in the world is that for? The Bible doesn't have to tell every detail of anybody's life. It's selectively choosing details, right, to give real history and real theology. Why that? Well, there's a long association with donkeys and kingship in the Bible. So I want to give you a couple just to remind us, just to kind of key in what they would have understood these things to mean. I already referenced Genesis 49 before with Jacob. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. So association with kingship and donkey is not a far fetch. You can go further. When David is dying and Solomon's going to take over, right, and the whole Bathsheba scenario happens, and they're going to bring, not Bathsheba, I'm sorry, his wife's name, who's, doesn't matter. When Solomon's going to take over, sorry, my brain just is still on a plane somewhere. When Solomon is going to take over, and they go and they bring him to David, and this is what he says: "Take with you the servants of your Lord, and have Solomon, my son, ride on my own mule, and bring him down to Gihon." And then we obviously know that all of these are pointing to the ultimate fulfillment, which is Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, just as it is written, "Fear not, daughter of Zion," quoting Zechariah 9, "Behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." So the association with donkeys and kingship is a normal reality within the Bible. So I don't think it's by accident. Obviously, I don't think that it's weird that they go into a donkey story with Saul. But what's interesting is this: the primary view, we're talking about kingship, the primary view in the Bible for the king of Israel is one of a shepherd. That's the primary image that we're given all the time, is a shepherd, right? Now, what is Saul being presented as? This is the key. He is being presented as a very, very bad shepherd. His dad's donkeys are lost, and he can't find them. By the way, this is going to be later contrasted. When we learn of David, when we're first introduced to David, where do we first get introduced to him at? Where is he? Tending his father's sheep faithfully. All of this is a story-driven reality. And why do I care about any of this? I think this is just really critical, and here's why. I grew up my whole life being taught and even believing that Saul, when he came to be a king, was kind of a half-hearted king. Good king, started out good, went bad. But when you read the narrative in view of the entire story, you get an entirely different picture, which is you get a picture that Saul started out as a bad king that got a lot worse, which, by the way, is a perfect picture of sin in general. So I don't think that Saul, I would be in this camp, by the way. There are plenty who disagree with me. You'll have to be a Berean and see for yourself, that Paul did not start out strong. I don't think that's the picture we're being given. We're being given a picture of a Benjaminite who's tall and then who cannot shepherd. And that's going to devolve over his reign. And it's going to get much, much worse. All right. I mean, by the way, if you just think about what we're looking at within this text, Saul comes in and says, "Let's go find the donkeys." They go and they search all over the place. And then it's Saul who says, "Can't find them. Let's go home." And it's his servant that goes, no, let's just keep going. Let's go to this man of God. There's a prophet here. By the way, Saul knows nothing about this prophet. And it wasn't Saul who had the resources. It was Saul's servant who was resourceful in this situation that says, "I have something that I can give this man." This should have been Saul. He's being painted and presented as somebody who is holistically unprepared for the tasks that are in front of him. Okay, let's continue the story. 11. He says this. We'll go 11:14. "As they went up the hill to the city, they met young women coming out to draw water and said to them, 'Is the seer here?' They answered, 'He is. Behold, he's just ahead of you. Hurry. He's come just now to the city because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. As soon as you enter the city, you'll find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat till he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. Afterwards, those who are invited will eat. Now, go up, for you will meet him immediately.' So they went up to the city, and as they were entering the city, they saw Samuel coming out toward them on his way to the high place." Okay, so we're just setting the stage here, right? Again, story, we're just setting the stage about this divine encounter that is about to happen. But I really want, again, the stage is set, but I really want us to see verse 15, which is why I had Aaron read those verses. Because what does the storyline do? Now we flash back. 15. Now, the day before Saul came, so we do a flashback, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, tomorrow about this time I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people. Now, I want you to notice a couple of things here, and I want to do kind of a quick little caveat just for a second. A lot of talk out there, right? When we were in Israel, a lot of talk out there about prophets, modern day prophets, and who speaks, and we had people speak to us. I had someone speak to me, prophesy over me. I want you to see, there's a lot of talk out there about that, and that the Lord said this or did this, but look how the Lord speaks to a real prophet. I want you to see how specific God is to a real prophet when he comes in. Tomorrow, I'm going to send you a man from this place, from this. When you see him, I will point him out. That's the guy, right? There is nothing vague about this. What I have often heard is stuff like, suffering's going to come, so you need to endure. But when you endure, God will give you the increase. Heard that a lot in Israel. And you never hear that in the Bible. You never hear stuff like that. God speaks, and he's specific. So that's my just first little soapbox I had to get on. I couldn't get past that one. What do we see in this passage, though? And here's I think the point of 15 and the point of really the first 15 verses. God orchestrates all things. 15. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord revealed to him, tomorrow about this time I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin. You shall anoint him prince. I will send him? I will send him? God speaking? What does he mean? So many people have this idea that God sees things first and then he kind of, works them out to his accorded, purposes and plans. That's not the passage that you see at all here. God takes credit for everything. Have you thought about the implications of this? Saul met Samuel, and he did not know him, and he had no idea that God had sent him there. The fact that a servant had a quarter of a shekel of silver, he had that and had no idea he was being sent by God. Obviously, the donkeys had no context for their role in God sending Saul to do his business. The fact that they had to walk through 5 major territories and regions, they had no idea that they were being sent. God is doing all of it. Every bit of this. And why does that matter? When Saul wants to go home, let's get out of here. He has no idea that God is sending him to the man of God. God is orchestrating all of these things. And I don't want to go any further in the text there. I just want to stop on the text right there. I just want to think through the so what with you. Like, does that matter? And then if so, why does that matter? What is that for us today? Let's just make a couple of observations about this text, maybe some principles that we can then say, how do we live in view of this text? What does this matter for my life? I think one of the observations as I was kind of thinking through this text, praying through it and thinking like, Lord, what are we trying to say here? Number one, I would say, be careful. Be careful what you demand. The Israelites demanded a king, and be careful what you demand because God just might give it to you. That's a principle that I don't think that we think about enough. You see, God was giving Israel a king, not the king that they needed. They needed Deuteronomy 17. He was giving them a king that they deserved. and the station that they were at spiritually. Sometimes God grants things in our lives to expose our hearts. You want that? Let's do that. Let me show you where that leads. And I think it's showcasing the state of Israel at this time, and it's true of us today too. Be careful what you demand. I've had so many people that, we kind of, as we all struggle when life, intersects us or does these, you just get radically upended by life. And you don't have a context for stuff, and you don't know what's going on. And then there's this perception that I had this expectation and it wasn't met, and then therefore God is either not good or he's unable or he's not loving or something happens inside of that. And I would say, be careful, be careful. Because none of that, your understanding of the situations in your life is not the focal point of the Bible. Certainly, this is not the focal point in this text. The focal point is God's sovereign plan. God's working these things out, and that actually leads to number 2. First one would be, obviously, be careful what you demand. It always just kind of like, you ever have those statements that sometimes people say that just kind of just for whatever reason, just kind of like get on your skin, and not everybody has the same ones. Sometimes they hurt your spine. I'm like, ugh. And it's those people that are be like, when I get to heaven, I got some questions for God. I'm like, you realize what you're even saying? I don't mean like legitimate like inquiry, like who isn't going to have 8 billion questions? I mean the you owe me an explanation kind of question. Ooh, be careful. That's just not, that's not the God of the universe. You don't cross-examine the God of the universe. That just doesn't happen. So you be careful how you demand. We come to God in humility. Number 2, though, God's sovereignty rules all the details. Nothing in this life is random. There's no random chaos. Nothing in this life is random. There were lost donkeys, and in this story it seems trivial, but it wasn't. It was sovereignly ordained. Look at Saul is chasing donkeys all over this land, but God's orchestrating a kingdom. He's setting up a kingdom, and he's establishing and exposing sinful Israel, and he's given them the king that they deserve. Your faith cannot be grounded in your ability to understand the circumstances that your life is involved in. That cannot be the essence of your faith. I have struggled with this in my own life, that if I can't make sense of something, then something isn't right. God is good if I can understand a particular thing. False. My understanding is irrelevant. God is good, and he's sovereign. But it doesn't stop there. Hallelujah. It doesn't stop there. My faith is not grounded in my abilities. My faith is grounded in the sovereign plan of God. But God's sovereign plan, this would be my third little observation, God's sovereignty is never separated from his compassion. And I think that his sovereign plan doesn't make him a distant ruler. That's not who God is. In fact, it's God's sovereign plan that ensures his closeness, his intimacy. He's right here. He's in all of it. When you cry out, like when your life just goes off a cliff and you cry out to God, you're not crying out to an indifferent ruler. You're crying out as a Christian to a reigning Father. He's there. Even if you're being disciplined, discipline is wrapped in covenantal love. And it's all based on his sovereignty. God doesn't respond to history. God writes history. God's writing this story. He didn't just look and go, it's a good thing those donkeys are lost. Maybe I can just inject somebody right into that and we'll just kind of spin it and make it good. No, God's writing this plan. And that's still happening today. You're involved in this plan right now. I don't know where you're at. We always say this. I feel like a broken record on that. I'm not sure where you're at. I'm not sure where all you're struggling with. I will say this. Be careful what you demand. God might give it to you. you come to God in humility. Number 2, I would say God's sovereignty rules everything, but it's never separated from his compassion. So cry out to your Father. Cry out to the one who can control human hearts and petition for each other. Cry out when someone's far off that God would bring them back. It doesn't absolve us from working. We're just going to the source. Cry out to the sovereign King because he loves you. He cares for you. Christians in the room especially, you've been called according to his purpose. He's placed his affection on you. And his sovereignty is not something to be debated. His sovereignty is not something to be pushed back against. It's something to be embraced because it's the only measure of security that we have. If it rests anything on me, I'm lost. I'm done. I think we have a lot to learn from Saul, from Israel. I think we have a lot to learn about the people of Israel in general and the heart of worship of the King. And we're going to see that further as the story continues to unfold. So stick with the story. Wherever you're at right now, I want to pray for you. We're going to take communion in just a moment. But what better option, what better idea and mindset to think through than God's sovereign plan of redemption so that you can even take communion today as a follower of Christ. That here we are, 20 centuries later, 10,000 miles away from wherever it happened, and we are sovereignly following a Jewish carpenter who's the Son of God. Only God writes a story like that.